I work as a late-night food delivery driver, mainly on Fridays and Saturdays when business is at its peak. Everyone's either hanging out at home or with friends, so they order food late into the night. One Saturday around 1 a.m., I got a request to pick up some McDonald's for a guy named Kyle. He lived just a few minutes away from where I was at the time, so I punched in the address for the nearest McDonald's, which was only a 2-minute drive away, and picked up his order. It was a small one, just 2 hamburgers. Kyle's house was about 5 to 7 minutes from the McDonald's. Following the app's directions, I found myself driving down a short, dead-end street that branched off another dead-end road. His house was the last one on the street, right next to a line of trees that bordered a highway. The area was eerily quiet, likely due to the late hour. Not wanting to wake anyone, I opted to call Kyle instead of ringing the doorbell. The phone rang once before going straight to voicemail, so I hung up. Almost immediately, I received a text from Kyle, instructing me to come to the door. I obliged and walked up to the big wooden porch of the house. The front door opened as I approached, revealing a man in his 30s. He looked surprisingly young for someone with no hair, which made me think he either liked the look or maybe he had a condition, though I didn't judge. However, what I couldn't ignore was the unpleasant smell of alcohol on his breath and his clearly intoxicated state. Usually, the payments are handled through the app, so there's no need to stick around for cash. But Kyle asked me to bring the food inside and place it on his kitchen table while he fetched a tip. Not one to turn down extra money, I agreed and stepped into his kitchen. The room was dimly lit by a small nightlight, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The smell in the kitchen was off-putting, but I couldn't quite place what it was. Kyle took his time in the basement, supposedly getting the tip, so I began to wander a bit. I stepped into the adjacent living room, which was illuminated only by the glow of a TV. The odor in this room was even more overpowering than in the kitchen. As I looked around, I noticed the back door was slightly open, maybe to air out whatever was causing the unpleasant smell. Curious, I walked over to the back door, thinking I might catch a breath of fresh air, but the smell only intensified as I stepped onto the back deck. That's when I heard the unmistakable buzz of flies. I turned to see 2 large black garbage bags with strange, elongated shapes inside. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I was likely staring at something far more sinister than just trash. Suddenly, waiting for a tip didn't seem like a good idea anymore. I rushed back inside, heading for the front door just as Kyle emerged from the basement holding a few crumpled bills. He called out to me, asking where I was going. Panicking, I quickly lied, saying I needed to check something in my car. He responded with a suspicious, "Oh, okay," as he handed me the money, but his attention was drawn to the back porch, where the light was still on. His demeanor shifted instantly. The friendly smile faded, and he asked in a much firmer tone if I had been out on his deck. I denied it, trying to keep my voice steady, but his stare lingered, making the situation even more tense. Without saying another word, I opened the door and stepped out, but not before Kyle grabbed my shoulder. I yanked free and sprinted to my car, slamming the door behind me. From the driver's seat, I watched as he ran back inside, leaving the front door wide open. I didn't waste any time starting the car and driving away, but I couldn't help but glance back. That's when I saw Kyle charging out of the house, holding something in his hand. My heart raced as I sped down the street, ready to call the police. I made the call as soon as I was a safe distance away, giving them all the details I could remember. Within minutes, I saw police cars racing towards Kyle's house. I parked down the block and watched as they pulled up and stormed the place. Kyle, if that was even his real name, had already started moving the bags towards the bushes in his backyard when they arrived. The police later confirmed that the bags contained something suspicious. The whole situation was surreal, but what stood out the most was how careless and reckless Kyle had been to leave the back door open, practically advertising his activities. Thankfully, he wasn't smart enough to evade justice. I work as a delivery driver for a small, family-owned Asian restaurant in my town. It's a great gig for someone my age, mostly because of the tips. My best friend Tim also works there, though he usually mans the counter and handles phone orders while I do the deliveries. One night, during a particularly slow shift, Tim took a call and told me I had a delivery to make after the food was ready. Once the order was packed into a brown paper bag, I headed out with the address plugged into my GPS. The directions led me to a narrow dirt driveway off the main road, leading onto an enclosed property. The property was far from luxurious. In fact, it looked like it hadn't been maintained in years. The house itself was dark, with no lights on inside, and the grass was so overgrown that it brushed against my shins as I walked up to the front door. The whole place had an eerie, abandoned vibe. Feeling uneasy, I called Tim back at the restaurant. He handed the phone to our boss, who, in his thick accent, told me not to waste the food and to knock on the door. Reluctantly, I did as I was told, knocking loudly since there didn't seem to be a doorbell. After about 30 seconds of waiting with no answer, I headed back to my car, pulling out my phone to text Tim about the weird situation. But just as I looked up at the house again, I noticed that a light had turned on upstairs. With a mix of curiosity and dread, I returned to the front door and knocked again. This time, on the very first knock, the door creaked open slightly, as if someone had opened it, but no one was there. The inside of the house was just as dark and uninviting as the outside, with only the dim light from upstairs offering any illumination. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty house. There was no response, no sound of footsteps coming to the door. I hesitated, wondering if I should just leave the food at the door and go, but something kept me there. Suddenly, I heard a voice call out, "Aquí arriba." I'm not fluent in Spanish, but I knew enough to understand that it meant up here. There was a staircase directly in front of me, leading up to the second floor where the light was coming from. Reluctantly, I walked over to the stairs and peered up. At the top, all I could see was an arm extending out from behind the wall, motioning for me to come up. The sight sent a shiver down my spine. There was something unnervingly stiff and unnatural about the way the arm moved. Trying to stay calm, I called out, "Tengo tu comida," hoping my limited Spanish would suffice. I started up the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. But as I reached the halfway point, the arm disappeared into the darkness of the room at the top. When I finally reached the top of the stairs, I could see that the person had retreated into a bedroom with the lights off. All I could make out was that same arm, now inside the room, still doing that bizarre come here motion. The rest of the figure was hidden in the shadows, as if they were only half there. That wasn't for me. There was no way I was going into that room. Summoning all the courage I had left, I stood firm and said, "Buddy, I'm not going in there. You want your food, you come out here with the money." For a moment, nothing happened. Then suddenly, the arm snapped back into the darkness. I stood frozen, waiting for the next move. Before I could react, something flew out of the room, hitting me square in the chest. It took me a second to realize what had just happened. I had been hit with something heavy and solid. That was enough to send me sprinting back down the stairs, food still in hand. I didn't stop until I was back in my car, engine roaring as I sped away from the house. I didn't bother calling Tim or our boss. I was too shaken to do anything but get away from there as fast as possible. I drove straight to the nearest house, desperate for help. When a woman answered the door, I quickly explained what had happened. Her face went pale as she listened, and when I finished, she told me something that made my blood run cold. No one's lived in that house for over a year. The shock of her words hit me hard. She said she would call the police, and after talking it over for a few minutes, I headed back to the restaurant, still in disbelief. When I got there, I tried to explain what had happened to my boss. He just shook his head and let it go. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if I had gone into that room, who or what I might have found. I used to work as a delivery driver for a local pizza place. They closed at 3 a.m. on weekends, and since I was taking a gap year from college at the time, my boss often assigned me to the late night shifts. There were usually 3 of us working that late, one person to cook the pizzas, one to take orders, and one to handle deliveries. I was always the delivery guy. One Saturday night around 2:30 a.m., I got an order to deliver 2 pizzas to an address that I still remember, something like 27 Crocker Drive. I took my beat-up old car, a 2002 Honda Civic, and started the short drive to the house. The roads were pitch black, with only my headlights cutting through the darkness. As I turned off the main road onto a smaller unlit road, I realized just how isolated the area was. After a few minutes, I turned onto a dirt road with a private property sign posted at the entrance. It seemed like I had arrived at the house, but just as I pulled onto the property, I heard a loud bang and felt the car start to wobble. I immediately knew I had a flat tire. Frustrated, I got out of the car to confirm that the front right tire was completely flat. The house was within walking distance, so I decided to deliver the pizza and ask for help with the tire. As I approached the house, I noticed that all the lights were off and the place looked eerily quiet. I knocked on the door and a young man in his early 20s answered. He looked normal enough, so I handed him the pizzas and explained the situation with my car. He seemed concerned and offered to help, saying he just needed to grab some tools from inside. While he went back inside, I took a closer look around and noticed something odd. A small spike strip was lying in the middle of the dirt road. It was too conveniently placed to be there by accident, and I started to suspect that it had been put there deliberately. Feeling uneasy, I decided not to wait around for the guy to return with his tools. I got back in my car and slowly backed out of the driveway, careful to avoid the spike strip. As I turned onto the main road, I saw the man come back outside, but I didn't stop to see what he was doing. I drove home as carefully as I could with the flat tire, feeling a growing sense of dread with each passing minute. When I finally got back to the restaurant, I told my boss what had happened. He didn't seem too concerned, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next night, I noticed a car following me as I drove home. It had no lights on and kept its distance, but I could tell it was the same guy from the night before. I pulled over in front of a house to see if he would do the same, and sure enough, the car pulled over a little further down the street. I called the police, feeling more paranoid than ever. A few minutes later, a cop car arrived, and I pointed out the car that had been following me. Just as I did, the other car sped off into the night, with the cop giving chase. I don't know if the police ever caught him, but the whole experience left me shaken. I quit that job a few weeks later, and I've been extra cautious ever since. If you've made it this far, you're 100% a horror fanatic and we approve. If you love our campfire-themed horror storytelling experience, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on our daily uploads.